She is the author of several articles questioning the Jewish circumcision ritual, Brit Milah, for Jewish publications, including the September-October 1990 issue of Tikkun. Her questioning into her own religion and these issues has been, I think, very important for both the Jewish community and the secular community, and I appreciate her work. And please help me to welcome Lisa Braver-Moss.
Thank you. I think I'll wait until people have begun to sit down. Well, I was going to begin by reading selected passages from Genesis chapter 17. Can you hear me okay?
Not well enough.
Not well enough? This is better? This?
Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure your thumb isn't over the little
Okay.
video.
Okay. Anyway, I was going to start by reading selected passages from Genesis 17, and Dr. LaRue read some of it, but I thought I would read it again and really give you a full flavor. It's a little long, but I want you to get the full flavor of it. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, "I am God Almighty. Walk in my ways and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will make you exceedingly numerous. And you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. And I make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile and make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. I will maintain my covenant between me and you, to be God to you and your offspring to come. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. I will be their God." God further said to Abraham, "As for you, you and your offspring to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. Such shall be the covenant between me and you and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. Thus shall my covenant be marked in your flesh as an everlasting pact. And if any male who is uncircumcised fails to circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his kin. He has broken my covenant. I am a Jew, and I question circumcision. I have been questioning circumcision ever since I learned of the rite as a girl. At that time, I questioned circumcision because it seemed wrong to cause pain to infants, and because it seemed strange to surgically alter a healthy, God-given part of the body. As I grew into adulthood, I added questions. I continue to add them. I question circumcision because of its risks. I question it because it is seen by many as a perfunctory act rather than a spiritual one. I question it because it seems to require parents to take advantage of their infants' dependence and weakness. And I question it because of the paradox that those who support infant circumcision often cringe at the idea of circumcision of an older child as a puberty rite. I'm sure all of these concerns are familiar to you as health professionals who also question circumcision. I've spent the last several years exploring the topic of circumcision as a writer and as a Jew. I have 2 circumcised sons, ages 5 and 2. I've written a couple of articles on Brit Milah, or the Covenant of Circumcision, for Jewish magazines. The first was published in Tikkun magazine in September of last year, and my other one will appear later this year in Midstream magazine. My inquiry into Brit Milah has convinced me that every one of my concerns about the rite is rooted not just in my own personal worldview, but in Judaism itself. Let's go back to the concerns I mentioned, starting with pain. According to Jewish law, it is forbidden to cause tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, or pain of living things. Even the necessary causing of pain is considered cruel in Judaism. and Jewish law even prohibits the pairing up of a small and a large animal for plowing in case the asymmetry causes the littler one discomfort. Clearly, concern over the pain of others has strong Judaic roots. What about the concern that circumcision involves the surgical alteration of a perfectly natural, God-given part of the body? This concern, too, stems from Jewish thought. We Westerners generally find the bodily mutilation practiced in other cultures to be deeply distasteful. This distaste is based on the Hebrew Bible's denouncement of pagan practices such as tattooing and cutting the flesh. Then there's the risk of serious complications and even death from circumcision. No matter how small these risks are, they must be considered. Now, even this concern is an echo of Jewish law. Judaism regards life as infinitely sacred and gives it precedence over all else. Accordingly, Jewish law tells us that any medical procedure involving even the possibility of risk to life must be viewed as dangerous and is therefore strictly forbidden. Thus, the risk of circumcision is not just a medical concern, but a Jewish one. My concern that many see Brit Milah as a perfunctory act rather than a spiritual one is also a Jewish concern. This is a thorny point of Jewish law, but I will try to summarize the issues for you. Judaism stresses deeds more than faith. So, according to Jewish law, one should perform the commandments, of which circumcision is one, even if the act does not reflect one's spiritual beliefs. And yet, there is also a Jewish law requiring that we perform every commandment with our whole heart, with spiritual intent or kavanah. So, although Jewish law supports circumcision even when it is done without a broader commitment to Judaism or God, there is also Jewish reason to find it unsettling when this happens. I also mentioned my concern that circumcision requires parents to take advantage of their infant's helplessness. Even this concept, that we have a moral obligation to protect those who cannot protect themselves, is, you guessed it, a Jewish concept. Additionally, the idea of treating others as you yourself would like to be treated is a Jewish one. According to Jewish lore, the legendary Rabbi Hillel was once asked to summarize Judaism while standing on one leg. Hillel replied, "What is hateful to you, do not to your fellow creature." Finally, a slightly more esoteric concern. I question infant circumcision because it seems to me that a person's age should not affect our attitude towards his suffering. In other words, if we find the circumcision of older children offensive, it seems to me we should find infant circumcision equally offensive. I believe the single most significant reason we continue to practice infant circumcision, both medically and ritually, is that we don't respond to the suffering of infants in the same way we respond to the suffering of older children and adults. As parents, our connection with our newborns is a very tenuous one, however strong it may feel when we first hold our little one and look into his or her eyes. The tenuousness of the bond only becomes apparent when we compare it to our bond with our older children. I, for one, could not subject my 5-year-old or my 2-year-old to circumcision for any reason other than absolute life or death necessity. Now, I'm not saying it was easy for me to do it at their birth, only that it would be impossible now. It is precisely this phenomenon that advocates of routine neonatal circumcision are articulating when they advise parents to get it over with now, because if you wait until your baby gets older, you will never want to do it. There's a way in which our infants are strangers to us when compared with our older children. Now, how would Judaism view this premise? If we do think of our infants as strangers on some level, and if our treatment of them is less humane because of it, Judaism disapproves. The commandment to love the stranger and not to oppress him appears not once but 36 times in the Torah. As some of you probably know, the Torah is the written text that's the foundation of all Jewish law and thought. So if we ask whether it is ethical to subject an infant to Brit Milah when we would not subject an older child to the same ritual, we are asking a Jewish question. So, to sum up, all of the concerns I have outlined here, pain, surgical alteration of the body, medical risk, lack of spiritual conviction, taking advantage of helplessness, and, so to speak, oppressing the stranger, stem from Jewish concepts. Now, this does not mean, and I want to be very clear here, that circumcision is an un-Jewish thing to do. Whether or not it conflicts with other Jewish principles, circumcision is still considered a quintessentially Jewish act, a symbol of the covenant between God and the Jewish people, and a primary emblem of Jewish identity. The point is, concerns about circumcision are also Jewish. Thus, a decision not to circumcise an infant, but to observe the covenant through a symbolic ceremony instead of a traditional one, can also be a Jewish decision. And I'm sure you'll hear more about this from Moshe Rothenberg, who's going to present next. Thousands of Jews today are questioning circumcision and deciding not to circumcise their infant sons. By my estimates, American rabbis are getting at least 3,000 calls every year from parents who are in conflict about the rite. And by the way, I can explain how I arrived at this estimate during the question and answer period if anyone is interested. The parents who contact rabbis because they find Brit Milah problematic are often requesting symbolic ceremonies as an alternative to traditional Brit Milah. They believe the covenant need not be established through a literal biblical interpretation, and they voice concerns about circumcision that invariably stem from Jewish thinking. In addition to those parents who contact rabbis about their conflict, thousands more are making the decision not to circumcise without contacting a rabbi. So circumcision is a Jewish concern of some magnitude. Now, rabbis are already performing symbolic covenant ceremonies for baby girls. While some rabbis are willing to perform such ceremonies for boys, these rabbis are still few and far between and prefer to remain anonymous. There is a grassroots Jewish group that distributes texts for symbolic ceremonies and provides support for parents questioning Brit Milah. However, the questioning parents are still having to forfeit a rabbi-officiated ceremony because of their convictions. I am hoping that more rabbis will begin to offer symbolic ceremonies to boys as well as to girls, and I will talk more later about how this might happen. I'd like to talk about how I arrived at the ideas I've summarized here, because my research process has been quite an adventure. The early drafts of my writing about circumcision, before I had done much Jewish research, were very vehemently anti-circumcision. Underneath my vehemence was an intense feeling of guilt about agreeing to have my own son circumcised, even though I had always found circumcision disturbing. My purpose in writing these early drafts was to shake people into thinking. If they got angry in the process, I figured it was a sign of their irrationality. But gradually, I started wanting to talk about my feelings in a way that would open people's minds rather than closing them. Gradually, I started looking to Judaism to deepen my inquiry. And gradually, from within this inquiry, I began to come to terms with my own experience of the rite. I began going to Jewish studies classes at my synagogue, reading about Judaism, and pursuing various research paths about circumcision at the Jewish Community Library. I ran my new ideas past the rabbis at my synagogue and from other branches of Judaism to make sure my perceptions of Jewish law and history were sound. So began a dialogue between rabbis and myself. My older son was attending the nursery school at my synagogue, and I needed feedback from Jewish peers about the articles I was writing, so I began bouncing new ideas off my fellow parents at the nursery school as well. Many people in my life were surprised at my desire to question circumcision in a Jewish context. Yet everyone with whom I have discussed my thoughts has been incredibly helpful in one way or another. And some of my friends and family and volunteer manuscript editors are in fact sitting here today. I appreciate their being here. Those who disagreed with me the most vehemently sometimes offered me the best insights and were sometimes the most gentle on my writer's ego. And those who thought I was onto something were occasionally my harshest critics. But in the process of sharing my ideas, seeking feedback, and refining my writings in a Jewish context, something unexpected began to happen. I began to feel connected as a Jew in a way I never had before. I began to experience for the first time in my life a sense of Jewish community. I found myself signing up to study Hebrew and learning the Sabbath blessings and prayers and preparing for my adult bat mitzvah ceremony, which was held last June. I found myself celebrating the Sabbath and attending services and sharing what I was learning of Judaism with my boys. I was getting a Jewish education for the first time, and I continue to pursue my interest in Judaism. I take my own Jewish heritage much more seriously now than I did before I began this inquiry. So far, I have talked about the Jewish roots of current concerns about circumcision, and I have shared with you how my inquiry about this topic has strengthened my own Jewish identity and sense of community. The next question is, how can you as health professionals respond to the needs of Jewish clients about the issue of circumcision? Now, I'm sure all of you recognize how important it is to be sensitive and respectful. Yet, from outside Judaism, it may be tempting to view the issue as a black and white question of human rights. To Jews, it remains highly complex. What's a health professional to do? First of all, I would strongly discourage any health professional from attempting a Jewish discussion of circumcision unless you are Jewish yourself and or deeply committed to studying the topic in depth beforehand. I feel it is nearly impossible to understand from the outside the complexities of this ritual and the pressures on Jewish parents regarding circumcision. This goes even for those who are largely non-observant and even for those who openly question circumcision. Sometimes, out of respect for Judaism, you will need to refrain from speaking your mind about a topic you feel strongly about. Of course, if Jewish parents want access to medical information regarding circumcision, it is your job to provide it. And if you feel circumcision is wrong medically, in my opinion, you have an obligation to say so. But although I have shared some of my Jewish inquiry about Brit Milah with you here today, I would not, as I said, recommend you're engaging in a Jewish dialogue with your clients unless you are Jewish and the topic interests you from a Judaic point of view. This dialogue is a Jewish one. I have shared it with you to demonstrate that the questions are all right there in Judaism itself. I believe the answers lie there too. How might you handle Jewish clients who have decided to circumcise their infant for religious reasons? I would urge you not to get involved in this decision, either explicitly or by showing tacit disapproval, with one exception. If the clients can't decide whether to do the circumcision in the hospital without ceremony or on the 8th day with ceremony, I feel they should be encouraged to do the latter. Technically, a hospital circumcision without ceremony is not recognized as a Jewish circumcision. But beyond this technicality, as long as the parents have decided to circumcise their son because they are Jewish, a religious ceremony makes infinitely more sense than a sterile hospital circumcision. How might you approach Jewish clients who express concerns about circumcision? This, too, requires the utmost insensitivity. Encourage your clients to include rabbis and even moels, or ritual circumcisers, in their thoughts about the topic. How will Jewish leaders become aware of the scope of Jewish concern about circumcision unless they are consulted by parents? Your clients can call a rabbi and make an appointment to talk just as they would make an appointment to interview a pediatrician. They do not have to belong to a congregation to do so. Now, I'm not suggesting that Jewish parents will all have the time or inclination to turn their concern about Brit Milah into a major Jewish inquiry, but they can accomplish a lot by making their conflicts known to Jewish leaders, family, and peers. Beyond this, in helping create a Jewish dialogue about circumcision, they deepen their sense of their own Jewishness and give of themselves to Judaism. Many Jews questioning circumcision will assume that their questions will not be well received by mainstream Judaism. Unfortunately, Jewish leaders often reinforce this assumption by glossing over the concerns that parents raise about Brit Milah and trying to coax them into a traditional view of the rite. But this may be changing a little. The liberal branch of Judaism known as the Reform Movement has in recent years set up its own Brit Milah board and has instituted a program to certify physicians as Reform Moels. Unlike Orthodox Moels, these Reform Moels, being physicians, can administer local anesthesia and provide medical expertise, which some parents want. Of course, the certifying board, it's called the Brit Milah Board of Reform Judaism, believes strongly in a traditional interpretation of Brit Milah. Yet they are beginning to include alternate viewpoints as part of their training class so that Moels can be sensitive to parents' conflicts about the rite. Just a week and a half ago, I gave a presentation at the local training class in which I discussed the need for covenantal ceremonies that do not include circumcision and proposed that a Moel should not downplay parents' concerns or talk parents into a traditional interpretation if they express doubts about it. I have been invited to submit a chapter discussing my views for the next edition of the textbook for the training course. Reform Judaism certainly does not endorse a non-traditional view of Brit Milah, yet its Brit Milah board has demonstrated a commitment to Jewish dialogue about the rite that includes non-traditional thinking. One final point about Jewish parents questioning circumcision. Some are limiting the scope of their inquiry by seeking only secular ammunition against circumcision, for example, medical arguments. But by restricting their inquiry in this way, they are fostering the illusion that circumcision cannot be questioned from a Jewish point of view. It seems to me that this amounts to a form of protection or indulgence of Judaism, as if Judaism were a fragile relic, unable to function in light of new information and insights. This is not an accurate picture of contemporary Judaism. Its beauty is precisely its ability to reckon with changes in understanding. Judaism is, as Rabbi Milton Steinberg put it, an organism. Certainly, tradition keeps Judaism alive, but so do inquiry, dialogue, and well-thought-out change. I'd like to take a few minutes before closing to read from the Jewish prayer book, Gates of Prayer. I find this poem to be an incredibly beautiful illustration of Judaism's love of inquiry. This is a meditation called Doubt. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the handmaiden of truth. Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery. A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief. Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false. Let none fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief. For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure. Those who would silence doubt are filled with fear. The house of their spirit is built on shifting sands. But they that fear not doubt and know its use are founded on a rock. They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure. Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help. It is to the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the handmaiden of truth. I would like to see a time when Jewish parents will be able to express their doubts about Brit Milah openly within the Jewish community. And I would like Jewish parents to have the choice between observing Brit Milah traditionally or bringing their son into the covenant symbolically in a ceremony officiated by a rabbi. This will only come about from within Judaism when Jewish parents' concerns about circumcision are recognized as Jewish concerns. Whether your Jewish clients have made a decision to circumcise their son, have some conflicts about it, or have decided categorically against it, they should be encouraged to participate in a dialogue within the Jewish community. Judaism needs their voices. Thank you very much.
Lisa, two very quick questions. One, if you had another son, would you circumcise him?
Where's my husband? I told him this question was I told you. Well, what is it going to be, honey? That's really a question that I would need to be answered in the context of my marriage, and I can't answer it for you now. It's something that
could you give me just a gut level, knowing what you know, and the writing that you've done, just hypothetically, knowing what you know, would you?
if I were to become pregnant again, I would have a girl. Definitely have a girl. So I'm sorry. I just need some privacy on this.
I understand.
Thank you.
I'm curious. Second question is, what is your advice to Jewish healthcare professionals, mainly doctors, who may have very strong traditional reasons for being pro-circumcision when he or she encounters a patient or parents who are opposed to circumcision?
Okay, if a Jewish physician who has pro-circumcision feelings encounters a client that has doubts about it, that is simply opposed.
Opposed to circumcision.
I mean, I think that health profession, I think what I've said really goes for that too. I think that the health professional should encourage the person to really engage with rabbis and other fellow Jews about this dialogue. I mean, have a dialogue. I don't think that it's a tricky question, though, isn't it? It's a tricky question because the physician is going to have certain cultural reasons as well as medical ones.
If it's a non-Jewish family, if he is a Jew.
Oh, well, I mean, if it's a non-Jewish family, well, they should get a second opinion. I mean, they shouldn't have to do that.
I appreciate your truth-seeking abilities here, everybody here. The issue that I have here is, I think, first of all, if we can set aside everything and focus on one issue, and that is that I believe, and I think there are many of us here that believe, and actually there's a difference between believing and knowing. Actually, I should change that to I know that every human being has the right to an intact body. I think that every person should have the ability to decide whether they want to be Jew, Christian, or whatever. It doesn't matter. And an 8-year-old baby boy is not in the capability to make any of those decisions, nor is a 12-year-old boy, and I think probably 18 years old might be a fairly decent area for that person to make a decision. The other thing that I want to bring up is that I don't think there's a person in this room that hasn't ever been lied to. If there is, I'd like to see a hand if someone has. I think what we're dealing with is the issue of the fact that over the period of history that we have all been lied to. And I think what happens is one lie is passed on to another generation, and that generation passes it to another, and over a period of years and centuries and so forth, the lies become truth.
So
Or they
you're
appear to
concerned.
become true.
You're concerned about this from a human rights point of view. You're saying that.
I'm concerned with the fact that I'm not saying that you have been lied to, because I'm not a judge. I'm not someone that can. I think that every human being is given the ability to seek and to find the truth on any issue. It doesn't matter if it's circumcision or whatever. And I think that you're a good example of it because of the fact that you have had so much questioning in your mind about this subject. And I think that what that is displaying is your truth-seeking abilities. And you are truly seeking the truth about this. And the reason that you feel uncomfortable about it, and the reason that many people feel uncomfortable about it, is because I believe that it is a lie. And I believe that what we're doing is exposing a lie that is why the media doesn't want us to expose.